Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board.
This is Jane. She thinks she's just filling her car, but she's also filling the air with cancer-causing toxic chemicals used to boost octane in gas. What doesn't burn in the engine enters the air and your lungs, even your heart and brain. Bad for everyone, especially kids. Ethanol is a natural octane booster, clean burning and non-toxic. More ethanol means less scary stuff in our gas and in the air we breathe. And that makes your choice pretty plain, Jane. American Ethanol, cleaner air for Nebraska.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Frayne Olson previews the USDA's reports on planting acres and grain stocks. Greg Kruger talks about weed control. Aaron Berger gives an outlook of the grazing season, and Loren Giesler discusses soybean seed treatments. North Dakota State Extension economist Frayne Olson is our market analyst this week. The USDA is scheduled to issue its estimates on quarterly grain stocks and prospective planting acres Thursday at 11 a.m. Central Time. The agency this week released its long-term projections for international production to 2025. Those numbers point to significant expansions of corn and soybeans in Brazil. It believes the country will increase its soybean output from 100 million metric tons this season to more than 131 by 2025. The USDA's forecast also shows Brazil growing about 25% more corn by that same year. Those predictions also include more corn and beans in Argentina over the next 10 years. Meanwhile, here in the States, winter wheat growers are battling up and down temperatures and a spring snowstorm. When we talked with Frayne Thursday morning, we began by asking about potential damage cold temps might have done to winter wheat over the last week.
Well, the early reports that were coming out indicated there might be about 20% of the hard red winter wheat crop that could potentially be affected. We're getting a little bit more updates, a little more information now flowing in. It looks like kind of the epicenter, the hardest hit area would be in south central Kansas. And the reason for that is a combination of how cold did it get, how long did it stay cold, and what was the crop development stage at that time. And again, with the freeze damage, it usually takes several days for some of that damage to appear, for the agronomists to get in there and try and make their estimates on what the damage might be. Best indication is we'll get some more updates, some little more details later this weekend or possibly early next week. And the thing that we're going to be looking for, the things that I'm looking for, of course, is the initial stages. But the reality is I don't know that the wheat market's going to be too wrapped around the axle about this one until we get some of the harvest reports. So I'll be very blunt. I think the wheat market could respond to that, the initial reports, but we're going to really need to hear the crop damage as the combines start rolling before the wheat market really takes off and pays attention.
What is the wheat market paying attention to in place of that international production?
Yep, there are some things internationally that the market's also paying attention to. The two areas we're focused on the most first is the Ukraine. We knew that the Ukrainian winter wheat acreage was cut pretty significantly last fall. It is now, just like the Kansas crop, is starting to break dormancy. The early indications are that their yield potential is starting to track lower. And so the market right now is expecting about a 30% cut in total production out of Ukraine versus last year. The other area we're watching pretty closely is what's happening in India. The last 2 years, the monsoon season has been lighter than normal. We're seeing some lower yields coming in. The other thing that's happened now is that the weather has shifted and they're now getting a lot of rain. And so for those farmers out there that understand the wheats, when you get rain on ripe wheat, the quality deteriorates fairly quickly. So there are some stories or some issues showing up that the Indian wheat market is low, but they may have to come into the world market and start buying some wheat. Again, we've got to be very concerned about prices because they're going to be a very price-sensitive buyer. But that is something, again, that the wheat market's paying attention to.
Let's move into corn and soybeans. What's your analysis of how those markets have moved over the last week or two with soybeans able to put on a little bit of money?
Yeah, I think there's a combination of things. I don't know that I can point to one thing specifically. From a fundamental standpoint, there's a couple things showing up. We've got some shipment delays coming out of Brazil, the major ports out of Brazil. That's typically happens this time of year. But again, it's something that the soybean market's starting to pay attention to. The other thing that's happening, we're seeing a little bit of change in some of the currency valuations, which is again putting a little bit of support into the markets. And we've also seen some of the outside financial community change, or the speculators change their positions from kind of a net short to more of a neutral position. So the combination of those three things has put a nice little lift into the soybean market. And again, I think for those that have some old crop soybeans left in the bin, this will be a good pricing opportunity.
What do you think is going to happen next week in the grain stocks and prospective plantings report?
Yeah, we're starting to get the first industry estimates are starting to come in now, in particular on the prospective plantings report. The few that I have seen, the numbers coming out of the private sector, very similar actually to what we saw out of the Outlook conference out of USDA in late February. So some key numbers, I guess, for farmers to be thinking about, if you can remember these. For the corn acreage, we're looking at about 90 million acres, which is up about 2 million from last year. For soybeans, the general guess is about 82.5 million acres, which is very similar to last year, actually. And on the wheat side, a cut back to about 51 million acres. So we're losing about 3.5 million acres of wheat. Most of that's, again, the winter wheat area. Some of it's going to be in the spring wheat. So those are kind of the numbers that I'm floating right now. If the prospective plantings report comes out significantly different, obviously there's going to be a price response.
What do you think we might be able to learn from that grain stocks estimate?
The key number I'm watching in the grain stocks report would be the corn number. One of the things we always have a challenge with is tracking feed usage. From an export standpoint, we get good weekly updates. We get some pretty good updates on the ethanol side with the amount of ethanol that's produced every week. But on the feed side, it's a really tough number to track. And so the only numbers we really get to follow how quickly we're using up is this quarterly stocks report. So that report, in my view, is going to be really important for the corn market.
Next week, Jeff Peterson from Heartland Farm Partners will join us to analyze the USDA's reports on grain stocks and prospective plantings. Iowa State University Extension livestock economist Lee Schultz will also be with us to look at the agency's quarterly hogs and pigs report. The United States just experienced its warmest December through February time period on record and its wettest winter in nearly 20 years. While precipitation in Nebraska was the 9th most in history, Iowa logged its wettest winter since data began in 1895. Nebraska Extension's Greg Kruger says the warmer weather has helped weeds get an early start. As corn and soybean growers prepare for the planting season, Greg says it's important they begin with a field that's weed-free. We recently talked with Greg about weed control in 2016.
This year we've seen a lot warmer temperatures, a lot earlier than what we have in past years, and we're starting to see weeds already start to germinate in the fields this year. So some of our early emergers are already poking their heads out, and it's really time to start thinking about how we're going to manage those.
How soon do you need to get the control before planting?
Yeah, so we want to get out there certainly well before planting. We've had this quote, stay clean, or start clean, stay clean, and we want to stay there. We want to make sure that whatever's germinating early in the spring, that we've got it cleaned out by the time we've gone in there. What that means is two different things. One, we've got to come in with a burn down of some sort if the weeds are already germinating. So like kochia, and we've got to come in and use some sort of a post-emergence option to burn that down. But we also need to think about putting some sort of a residual product in that tank so that we get good control and keep that field clean as we start into planting season.
Let's go a little bit further on kochia and tell me why that's so difficult to control.
Yeah, kochia is a beast. It's an early emerger. It's a very aggressive weed, and once it starts to grow, we get 5-6 inches on it. It becomes very difficult to control with any of the herbicide tools we have. So, in our no-till systems, this weed is just one of those that it gets to us a lot quicker than most of the other weeds out there. As we've talked about in past years, we've got lots of herbicide resistance problems out there. Our favorite product, Roundup or glyphosate, has evolved resistance in this particular weed species. So our options are much more limited post-emergence, so that just adds more need to make sure we've got some sort of a residual in that weed control program.
You also mentioned marestail. How much more difficult has marestail been to control over the last couple of years?
Yeah, marestail is one of those challenging weeds. It's pretty much ubiquitous in the state of Nebraska, so we see it almost everywhere. We'll see it up in the sandhills, we see it in all of our corn and soybean fields out there, field edges, ditch banks. It's one of those that's popped up everywhere. It's definitely one of those weeds that loves no-till systems. We know that tillage systems tend not to have as much marestail problems because we bury that seed, but the no-till systems, it's one of those that's just about everywhere. And some of the research that we've done here recently, we found that 98% or more of the populations that we've collected from row crop fields are resistant to glyphosate. So if we have it in our corn or soybean fields, we've got to plan to manage it as if it was resistant to glyphosate.
Do you want to reinforce the techniques or the methods that would help you battle against resistance or try to prevent resistance?
Yeah, resistance management is definitely one of those things that we want to keep in mind as we're building these programs, particularly here in the spring when we've got lots of options. We can use some of those residual-based herbicides, and that's going to add new modes of action. It's going to add potential tank mix options that we won't have later in the year. So it's a good opportunity to start to get ahead on some of these resistance management strategies. Other things that we want to consider, if we can go into crop rotation, if we like continuous corn here in certain parts of the state, but if we can rotate something else into that rotation, it gives us some new herbicide options there. And like always, we want to look at how we implement our cropping system programs. Adding diversity to the program in any way possible is going to help us manage resistance.
The Crop Watch website has more information about weed control in 2016, including tips on calibrating sprayers and getting an early handle on kochia and marestail. The March Nebraska farmer says it's a non-cash expense most beef producers don't really consider, but cow depreciation can be the second largest cost to cow-calf operators. At UNL's Ranching for Profitability workshops this winter, Nebraska Extension educator Berger discussed several approaches to reducing depreciation costs in the cow herd, including timing weight gain for heifers in accordance with breeding time. You can read about strategies to reduce cow depreciation in the March Nebraska Farmer. We also talked with Aaron for this week's episode of Market Journal. The latest U.S. drought monitor from UNL continues to show no drought classifications for Nebraska. That means the state has maintained perfect conditions for every week in 2016, the longest streak since Nebraska saw perfect conditions for 42 weeks from October 2009 to August 2010. But for those who are looking ahead to the grazing season on their pastures and ranges, Nebraska Extension's Berger says the most important months for moisture are still ahead.
So as we look at what's coming up here in the next few months, obviously as we record this, it's kind of March time frame. So really the critical months we're looking forward to are April, May, and June. That's really when we get the precip that drives what we're looking at in terms of range and pasture conditions. Right now we've had a really warm March for the most part, and moisture's actually been a little bit below normal. So we're really kind of anticipating, hopefully we'll see that shift a little bit to a more wetter pattern as we think about growing grass for the growing season.
As you look ahead to those months and what we might get for precip, how do you use that information to determine what you're going to have for grazing?
Yeah, so as we think about grass growth, obviously moisture that comes during the period when it needs it, that soil moisture profile is really important. So we're being anticipatory and thinking about some trigger dates. If we don't get a certain amount of moisture in the soil profile by, say, May 1st, June 1st, then we're thinking about reducing stocking rate, delaying turnout, some management practices to adjust to that variation of forage production.
We mentioned the precip, but the temperature and specifically the soil temperature that we have across the state, how does that put grasses ahead of growth or ahead of status maybe?
Right, so right now as we record this, it's mid to late March, and we're thinking about soil temperatures that are 8 to 14 degrees above normal right now. That's really triggering these grasses to initiate growth early. How that plays out really waits to be seen as we see whether these temperatures hold or do we go back into a cooler pattern, kind of set them back a little bit. So one thing we do know right now is we look to be earlier than normal in terms of when that grass may be ready to graze.
How different could the grazing plan be for different areas of Nebraska?
Yeah, so it can really vary across the state. If we think about the eastern third of the state, maybe smooth brome dominated, this type of conditions we have right now is really excellent for that. Full soil moisture profile, good warm temperatures. We move into the sandhills. Those are predominantly warm season grasses. Their really critical time is that late May, June time period in terms of moisture. So the outlook there is really waiting to be seen. Western part of the state, we're cool season dominated. We're starting to see a little bit of grass growth start to green up out there, but really April, May moisture there is the big driver for us. So really the time period is still ahead of us in terms of what we're going to be seeing there.
You mentioned the important dates for that early season of grasses. What about for the later in the summer that you'll be using those pastures?
Yeah, so as we think about the sandhills area, warm season dominated, the data would say that really May, June precip is really critical there as well. Once we get past the end of June, early July, even if we get some precip, it has limited benefit in terms of that grass growth. Now there's still benefit, but the real critical window is that April, May, June.
Wondering how those grasses, especially to the west, have recovered from drought. Is it a position where they are back to normal?
Yeah, so what is normal? That's
right.
a great question, but I think we have seen excellent conditions in 14 and 15. We've seen a lot of recovery in many cases of our desired species. And so I would say plant vigor, plant health is really in a good state right now. With the last 2 years, we've got a lot of grass that's had excellent opportunity to recover. And so plant vigor and health is really in a good position at this point.
Last point to make, is there anything with weed control that producers need to be aware of?
Yeah, as we think about this time of year, it's a good time of year to go out and start doing some scouting. If you know some areas that maybe you've had some weeds in the past that need to be addressed, noxious type weeds, having a plan and then making sure you get those at their most vulnerable state is important.
On the Market Journal website, we'll link to more resources on grazing from UNL's beef specialists. Starting the first week of April, you'll have the chance to attend meetings on a unique topic from Nebraska Extension. The seminars are titled, "So You've Inherited a Farm, Now What?" Allan Vyhnalek is one of Nebraska Extension's educators running the program. He explains the reason for starting the workshops.
I have to tell you, it's been going on for monthly for maybe a couple, 3 years now. I'll get a call from somebody, because people know that I help with land management across the state. I'll get a call from somebody in the state that says, so, we always figured Mom and Dad would live forever, but they didn't. They passed away. So now I have this farm, and I have to deal with this farm. And I grew up on the farm, but now I don't live there anymore. And so I don't know how to manage it. What do I do next? What's going on? And so we came up with this idea of having a workshop called "So You've Inherited a Farm, Now What?" for those that are just having to manage that farm for the very first time.
Workshops will address options for keeping or selling the farm. They'll also explain how you can work with renters and leases as well as farm managers. You are asked to pre-register to the host county extension office at least 3 days in advance. The fee is $20 per person or $30 per couple. With planting season approaching, this week we talked with Nebraska Extension plant pathologist Loren Giesler about soybean seed treatments. Soil temperatures at 4 inches Wednesday reached into the mid-50s in southeast Nebraska, while cooler weather helped lower soil temps in the west. When we talked Tuesday morning, we started by asking Loren how soil temperatures at the beginning of spring have compared to last year and what that might mean for diseases.
Well, compared to last year, we're a lot warmer, so that's going to really affect, what we're looking at for seedling diseases and what's coming on in the year.
So what if people are still thinking about using a seed treatment for soybeans this year? They're on the fence, they're not exactly sure what to do.
Well, I think a lot of farmers have already maybe had their seed ordered with treatment. For those that are on the fence, I think this year, my forecast, and every time I forecast it, I can be wrong, right? But with it, I think that we're going to see probably more Phytophthora if the soil temperature warm and we get those rains versus Pythiums, which were active more the last 2 years. We've had a lot of cool, wet conditions at planting. If we maintain these warmer soil temperatures, we go in and we get some moisture. That's where those fields with Phytophthora, because that fungus is active at a warmer temperature, and I expect that to be more of a problem if we get those rains in Pythium this year.
You want to recap for me what Phytophthora does and kind of what impact it might have?
Yeah, so Phytophthora root and stem rot's a disease that, it will have some history in the field usually, that you'll have significant stand loss anytime you have wet years. It's one that can kill the plant at any time. So from the seed stage all the way up through reproductive stages, anytime there's flooding or wet conditions in the field, you'll see those dark stem that base dark on the outside from the soil line working its way up. So people that have had Phytophthora probably know it in some way. And so just make sure in those fields you've got a good protection on for Phytophthora. You can also use resistant varieties. Guys have already made those decisions, but hopefully they've got some resistance in that field, and then they're looking at a good seed treatment.
And the concern with Pythium is?
Well, and with Pythium, that's one that's just, it's everywhere. So pretty much when you get really wet conditions, particularly on fine textured or clay soils, that's where you tend to see more Pythium issues. And it can be active during all that temperature from cool all the way up through the Phytophthora zone, but you tend to see more Pythium problems when you've got cooler temperatures that kind of stress that seedling when it's coming out of the ground, and then that kind of makes it more easy for that seedling to succumb to the disease.
There's also a new seed treatment that the university has been working with. Tell me about it and what producers might be able to know.
Well, we have seen, and it came out last year, and they did a lot from Berger, the Levo product, and we have had some work with that, over the last year, and in fields where growers have sudden death syndrome. Okay, and sudden death syndrome is one that, it is favored by those cool, wet conditions at planting or early planting. So if we got warmer temperatures, we wouldn't expect to see as much. But with the Levo their seed treatment, in fields that have SDS, that's a good option. The question is, how much SDS do you have to make it profitable, because it is a fairly pricey treatment. But with that, if you have a significant problem with sudden death syndrome, I'd really encourage our viewers to look at Levo as an option, because in 2 out of 3 of our on-farm trials that were done with the on-farm research program, we had good returns on that. So it's just going to be a matter of how much they have, though. The one that didn't see a significant gain, less SDS in the field.
And Loren, finally, what about seed treatments for soybean cyst nematode?
Well, there are a few seed treatments out there for that, and so far, we're not seeing significant gain, in yield with some of those treatments. So if we're looking at, Clariva's, Syngenta's product, Poncho Vetivo from Berger, the Vetivo part of that has some activity against cyst nematode. And then, even the Levo seed treatment that we mentioned for SDS, that's got nematicidal activity. The problem with cyst nematode is, unless you're in a really high population level, which a lot of our farmers are not, the return on that, I'm not seeing that all the time. So I just be cautious on that. And you don't want to use it unless you have cyst nematode, and then you may or may not get good return on that. We're still working on it, so I haven't said it's not good, or it's not worth it yet. I think the key is that if we get a dry August, that's where you're going to see these seed treatments pay returns. In the last few years when we've been working with them, we've had really wet conditions in that fill time. So we need that stress for those to return later.
Why are they so effective in August, so late after you?
Well, it may be a little counterintuitive, yeah. But the point is that the damage is early on, and you get injury to the root system, or like with cyst nematode, you've got all those parasites feeding on the root system. Well, if that plant's healthy in August and there's plenty of moisture available, plenty of nutrients, everything's going great, you don't see as much impact of that draw on the system. So that's what we're looking at.
Next week, we'll look at the winter wheat crop in Nebraska and discuss potential disease problems with Nebraska Extension plant pathologist Stephen Wigulo. Now, with this week's weather forecast, here's Nebraska Extension Associate State Climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here again for the weekly forecast. Of course, the big news during this last 7 days was the big snowstorm that hit the state. The models did really underplay this system in terms of its intensity, and that's not uncommon at this time of the year, where a system that looks to be moderate to weak in tendency rapidly evolves into a major snowstorm as we get close to the event itself. Overall, a fairly widespread area of snowfall, and if we go to the first figure that we want to show you, we actually can see the line of snow extending from northeast Colorado up through Nebraska and northern Iowa. This area here is cloud cover that was associated with the system, and this was taken about midday on Thursday. So the system had yet to sweep through the upper Great Lakes region, and of course this is going to be a big player in our weather as we go through the next couple days, as this upper air low sits and pivots over the upper Great Lakes region, and that impacts the systems coming from the western United States. So if we look at what's going on presently today, we have one system that is moving rapidly through the region toward the Great Lakes. We should see that cold front completely pass through the state today, and as we go through the overnight hours, it will clear us completely. So there may be a few flakes of snow on the backside of this, but overall precipitation is depicted as being very light with this system, with the majority of the precipitation associated over in northern portions of the plains regions, getting southward to extreme northern Nebraska, and then a secondary piece of energy may actually sweep through northeastern Kansas and northwestern Missouri and just barely clip the southeastern corner of the state. But overall, quantitative moisture output from this system is expected to be less than 1/10 of an inch. Now, as we go into tomorrow, what we are going to notice is that system rapidly moves toward the mid-Mississippi River Valley, and we start to see a ridging pattern develop, bringing much warmer air into our region. So we'll see a nice warm-up on Sunday, but even a better warm-up as we get into Monday, as we have a large ridge building into the center part of the country. So we return right back into the upper 50s across extreme northern Nebraska to potentially near 70 degrees in southwest Nebraska. But once again, draw your attention to this big upper air low that is starting to develop over the central Rockies and will progress eastward as the week progresses. So as we get into Tuesday, the system digs farther southward. That's going to pull moisture up from the Gulf. That will really start to saturate the atmosphere in advance of this system. And as we get into Wednesday, now the system takes aim at the central United States, and it looks like it's going to follow a similar pattern of this last storm system. So the western half of the state has the best likelihood of seeing accumulating snowfall, and we actually may see some significant accumulations if this system continues with the same intensity currently depicted, or even intensifies further as we get closer to the event. Further east, we're already looking more of a rain and potentially severe thunderstorm outbreak in portions of eastern Kansas, Missouri, maybe southeastern Nebraska. And as the system completely passes, as we get into Thursday morning, we might draw some cold air on the backside of it to see a few flakes of snow and light accumulations in extreme eastern Nebraska. And this system will sit and spin over the Great Lakes region and intensify. So as we get into Friday, you start to see the system intensifying. That's going to draw some very cold air down on the backside of it. And we're looking at an Arctic outbreak as we go into next weekend, with potentially seeing lows that will approach the upper teens to the low 20s across eastern Nebraska. In terms of the forecast for next Thursday following Tuesday, that cold air remains in place, so we're going to see below normal temperatures. And in terms of precipitation, we see this below normal precipitation, but yet again, another system starts to approach us as we get close to the Tuesday time frame.
Thanks, Al. Today's interviews are available individually on the Market Journal website and through the Market Journal mobile app. They include information on grain markets, weed control, the outlook for grazing season, and soybean seed treatments. As always, you can keep up with Market Journal during the week by following us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Next week, Jeff Peterson will analyze corn and soybean markets, and Lee Schultz will discuss hog markets. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.